What is the work that actually is required to keep all of us alive and going, whether that be the teachers or whether that be, the Hunts Point grocery workers, right, who do the distribution of the groceries that we all buy at our grocery stores in New York City, like the essential work that we don't even notice half the time because we don't even know where it happens, but that exists to keep us going. The delivery drivers, the mail, the U.S. Postal Service, which, they've been trying to destroy for decades. All of this work that suddenly we have a moment to appreciate in a different way. And of course, that hasn't shaken out in it being paid better in a lot of cases, or it was temporarily paid better. And then, the bosses yank that back as quickly as they can. And we've also had sort of experiences with like, oh my goodness, the government can just send everybody a check, it turns out. Wow. Okay. Like we have a lot of information, a lot of things that they said weren't possible. Right. Became possible briefly when we were in an emergency. And they've been trying to sort of squish that back down since, lower our expectations back down. Right. And so that's the fight going forward, right, is to not forget the things that happened in those moments, to not forget that there was a moment where cities were opening up hotels to house the homeless, right. And to not forget that they could just send everybody a check, that unemployment benefits could actually be at a livable level, that we could actually consider what work is essential to keep us going and what work is maybe not essential and maybe we don't need it at all.
And what would that be? What would some examples of non-essential labor be?
Oh, well, I'm not that far from Wall Street. So I think we could start there. That would be, we could eliminate all of that. That is a whole bunch of unnecessary
labor. The internet proved some of that already.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Well,
short sales, maybe that's
start. Yeah. No, it's funny because people have asked me about this. I'm doing interviews for this book at the same time as this, story is blowing up. And the way that some people are clearly doing this just because they, want to punch a hedge funder, which, I understand. But also people are doing it because work is terrible. So maybe you can just gamble enough to get out of it. This fantasy of the stock market, which is definitely not going to work. But the interest in the fantasy is still interesting. But yeah, so right. So okay, we don't need Wall Street. That's one. But other things, I think about the workers at the GE plant early on during pandemic who demanded to, instead of making parts for military aircraft, make ventilators.
Yeah.
And that was a moment where people are saying this work would be a whole lot more meaningful if we were making things to save lives right now, rather than making things to, in that case, sort of explicitly take lives.
Right.
But yeah, all of these questions about what is the thing we're doing? What is the thing that we would rather be doing? But also what do we really need to have done? And how do we distribute that work fairly so we don't have a sort of three-class system where some people are just unemployed, some people are working from home, and others are going out to work day after day?
So if we were to create the conditions, and maybe it does come out of this pandemic, although, as you said, it's about remembering what is possible. And I think that's probably on us as progressives to continue to just chime in and throw it at our lawmakers. But if there was this great awakening, when you had someone like a Sarah Nelson meeting with Chuck Schumer, and Chuck Schumer's learning about MMT, whether or not, clearly he didn't end up choosing that side, but he at least learned about it. Yeah. So there was an awakening. There were conversations that were being had among institutional Democrats that you would have never thought. Even Senator Schumer, and maybe it's just the fear of being challenged. Who knows what that comes from? But there was an awareness that was not even amongst the public and progressives and Democrats and more institutional Democrats of the possibilities that could be presented afterwards, not just to get us out of a crisis, but if we'd actually worked within that realm, we might not be in this crisis.
Right.
Do you think that if the conditions were to shift, even just 20%, we may potentially live in a world where more folks could work towards something that they actually do love, that people who are writers could be paid fairly, that artists would be invested in, and that's something that we used to do not too long ago in this country?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that I write this book, and it's this thick because I spend a lot of time talking about history, is to remember that it was less than 100 years ago that, the Roosevelt administration threw a bunch of money at artists.
Yes.
And it was, we should also remember that it was because a bunch of communists organized a bunch of artists into an artist union and demanded that artists be treated as workers under the Recovery Project. And so, it's a history that shows that this can change, that our relationships to work and capital can change. But it does require organizing. We can't just sort of wait and hope that everybody, hope that like Chuck Schumer has had an enlightening moment, because I don't trust that to happen. But I do think, right now this week, there's prep for a union vote in an Amazon warehouse in Alabama.
Right. Huge story.
Right. The Chicago teachers are facing down with Lori Lightfoot yet again. I don't understand why she doesn't learn, but nurses have been organizing and going on strike to demand safer conditions. Like, there have been a whole lot of little labor rebellions that are adding up. And I think, once it's a little bit safer, but we still remember all of this stuff, there is potential for that to get really explosive.
I mean, so it's really interesting to say that, because I feel like every time there is the potential for a strike or major organizing or whatever the efforts are, if nurses across California right now, it's an educational moment. Mm-hmm. It's other workers look to that experience and say, oh, we can do this too. And so you're saying that post-pandemic, or when folks are vaccinated, but they're still dealing with the ramifications of the economy and the consequences of them not being in safe environments, there are going to be more strikes or potential strikes.
I hope so. I hope so. I can't promise it, but I certainly think that, we've been in, again, sort of subsequent crisis after crisis for my entire adult life. Right. And each time a little bit of that consensus that there is no alternative falls away. And we're hanging on to sort of capitalist realism by our fingertips right now, desperately clinging to the idea that we can return to some sort of normal. And then we've got an even bigger crisis looming, which is the climate crisis, mm-hmm. which is not going away, mm-hmm. and we can't vaccinate against it. We have to take much bigger actions and have much bigger solutions. And all of this is just, again, it's just putting that many more cracks in this belief that there isn't a better way to do things.
Wall Street's not going to solve the climate crisis.
Wall Street is not going to solve the climate crisis. Wall Street can't even solve a Reddit board crisis.
You outdid it. I was going to say Wall Street can't create the Green New Deal. What?
No.
Oh, man. Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers.